All right, so to review factoring, basically all what we're doing is we are unfoiling or undistributing two binomials. So for this first problem here, where we have x squared minus 10x plus 24, I like to use this diamond method to help me come up with what the factors are. So for the diamond method, I know my equations always have to be, of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So I have to have it in order of the variables, and then I know that this top part is always going to be a times c, and the bottom part is always that middle term b. So for number 1 here, I know since there's no number written in front of the x squared, I understand there to be a 1 there. So I'll take the 1 times the 24, and that goes in the top part. And then the b, or the number in front of the x, goes in the bottom part. And since this is a minus 10, I'm going to make it a negative 10. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be a positive 24, but add to be a negative 10. Now the only way I can multiply two numbers and get it to be a positive number is if they're both either positive or both numbers have to be negative. So in our case here, since I want it to add to be a negative 10, I know both of my numbers are going to be negative. And the only numbers that I can come up with that multiply to be 24 but add to be 10 are 6 and 4. So once I have those, I can go ahead and split up this problem. So I can have it be x squared, and the minus 10x is going to become a minus 6x minus 4x. And I got that from right here in our diamond. And then I have the plus 24 at the end. So the first part and the last part stay the same. It's just that middle part, that negative 10x, gets split up using the middle parts of the diamond. And then I group the first two together and group the last two together. So the first two, I look to see what they have in common. So x squared and minus 6x, they both have an x in common. So I'll factor out the x. And out of the first term, I would get x. And out of negative 6x, when I take out x, I get a negative 6. And then out of the last two terms, I notice that negative 4x and 24 are both divisible by 4. And since this is a negative 4, I'm just going to take out a negative 4. So when I take out negative 4 from negative 4x, I'm left with x. And when I take out negative 4 from 24, so that means I'm taking 24 divided by negative 4, and I get a negative 6. So if I've done this correctly, the parts that are in parentheses should be the same. And so in our case here, we have this x minus 6 and x minus 6. Those are the same. So I know since they're the same, I can factor them out. So I get x minus 6. And then I would be left with x from this first one because I took out this x minus 6. And then when I take out x minus 6 from the second term, I get a minus 4. So in factored form, this would be x minus 6 and then x minus 4. And that's just the factored part. Sometimes when we do equations and stuff, we'll have to set that equal to 0 so I can solve things. But right now, I'm just reviewing the factoring part. So for example 2 over here, if I go ahead and do my diamond again, I know that there's a number 1 in front of that x squared. So I'm going to take 1 times the 16. That gives me 16. And then my b term is a negative 10. So I'll put negative 10 there. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be 16 but add to be negative 10. And I know that the only way I can multiply and get a positive 16 is if both numbers have the same sign. So they're either both positive or they're both negative. Since this is a negative 10, I know they're both going to be negative. And so now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be 16 but add to be 10. And the only numbers I can come up with are negative 2 and negative 8. So now I'm going to go back to that original problem, and I'm going to start with the x squared. My negative 10x becomes my middle two terms from this diamond here. So I get a minus 2x minus 8x. And then the last part is this last number from my original problem, so the plus 16. So now if I group the first two together, I notice that they both have an x in common. So I'll take out an x, and I would be left with x minus 2. And then for the last two problems, if I take out a negative 8 I would be left with x minus 2. So if I did this right, the part that's in parentheses should be the same, and it is, notice. So I can take out an x minus 2, and then I would be left with an x minus 8. So this is the factored form of x squared minus 10x plus 16. For example 3, if I do my diamond here, so I know there's a number 1 in front of the x squared, so I'm going to take that 1 times the negative 6, and that gives me a negative 6. Then my b term, so this number in front of the x, that's a negative 1, so I'll put a negative 1 here. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be negative 6, but add to be negative 1. Now, since I'm multiplying to be a negative number, I know one of these numbers has to be positive and one has to be negative. And so now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be 6, but when I add them together, give me a negative 1. And so in this case, it's going to be a negative 3 and a positive 2. So when I go plug them in, I know I keep my x squared from my original problem. My negative 1x comes from this negative 3 plus negative 3x plus 2x, and then I have a minus 6. So if I group the first two together, I notice I can take out an x, and I'd be left with x minus 3. And if I group the last two together, I can take out a 2. So I'll take out a positive 2, and I'm left with x minus 3. So now my x minus 3's are the same, so I can take out an x minus 3, and I'd be left with x plus 2. That is my factored form. Right, so for 4, when I have a number in front, first off, I always like to double check and make sure that I can't just get rid of that number, or factor out that number by dividing everything by it. So I'm looking at the 2, the 11, and the 12. They all don't have something in common, so I have to leave all of those numbers there. If I could have taken it out, like if I would have had like a 4x squared plus 16x plus 16, like all of these are divisible by 4, so I could take out a 4 first and get x squared plus 4x plus 4, and then I could do my diamond on just this part inside the parentheses. So anytime I can factor out that common factor, that thing that they have in common, so I can deal with smaller numbers, the better off I am. So for 4, I know I can't factor anything out, so I'm going to have to take the 2 times the 12, and that gives me 24. And then my b term is the 11, so I'll put the 11 on there. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be 24, but add to be 11. And a lot of times this is just guess and check. You just have to start figuring out what two numbers multiply to be 24. So I can start with like 2 and 12, but if I add those together, that gives me 14, so that's not going to work. I could try 4 and 6. That's not going to work. That's going to give me 10. But if I do 3 and 8, that does work. So you see how it's just kind of like a guess and check to figure out what will work inside the diamond. So once I do this, now the order that I put these middle terms in doesn't matter when I do this. So what I'm going to do, since this starts with a 2x squared, I'm going to put the 8x next to it. And then I'll have the plus 3x plus 12. And the reason why I did that is because when I group the first two, now they have a 2x in common, so I can take out a 2x, and I would be left with x plus 4. And then out of the last two, they have a 3 in common, so I can take out a 3, and I'd be left with x plus 4. So now the part that's in parentheses is the same, so I can take out the x plus 4, and then I would be left with 2x plus 3. This is my factored form. Okay, let's do another one. So let's do 5. So if I take 4 times negative 2, that gives me negative 8. And then I'll put 7 in the bottom part of my diamond. And so now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be negative 8, but add to be 7. So that's pretty handy. 8 and negative 1 work well there. So when I put this in here, I'll do 4x squared. I'll go ahead and put the 8x next. and then minus 1x minus 2. So if I group the first two together, I see that they're both divisible by 4x. So I'll take out a 4x, and I'm left with x plus 2. And then when I group the last two together, I notice they're both negative, so I can take out a negative 1, and then I would be left with x plus 2, because negative 2 divided by negative 1 would give me a positive 2. And now the parts that are in parentheses are the same, so I can take out an x plus 2, and I'll take that times 4x minus 1. And then for 6, if I do the same type of thing, so I'll take 5 times 8, that gives me 40. And then my b term goes in the bottom, so that would be negative 14. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be 40 but add to be negative 14. So in our case, that would be a negative 10 and a negative 4. So when I split this up, I'm going to put the negative 10x next to the 5x squared. And then I'll have negative 4x, and then I have the plus 8. So if I group the first two together, I notice they're both divisible by 5x. So I'll take out a 5x, and I'm left with x minus 2. And then with the last two, I notice that they're both divisible by 4, and this is a negative 4, so I'm going to go ahead and take out a negative 4, and then I would be left with x. Now, 8 divided by negative 4 gives me a negative 2. So now the parts that are in parentheses are the same, so I can take out that x minus 2, and I would be left with 5x minus 4. And that's it for factoring trinomials.